Yellow and Red Mix by Digits 27, Chapter 22. Rain poured in sheets from the darkened sky. Each dropped it like a little sunbone ribbon more and more of Naruto's skin from his body. Every splash was like a gong, reminding him of everything he lost as he looked out over the throngs of people gathered around. All eyes were focused to the front of the roof, where a simple wreath lay before a closed coffin. Naruto's eyes were fixed on the plain framed photo in front of it. It was smeared and distorted by the relentless rain, but Hiruzen's face was still visible. It was a photo from his first day as Hokage. With his arms around his wife's waist and a gleam in his smile, he looked ready to take on anything as he first put on the Hokage robes. It wasn't supposed to be a day of mourning, but a day of remembrance, of celebration of the third time as the leader of the Leaf Village. Somehow, that didn't manage to brighten up the atmosphere as people openly cried for their lost leader. Naruto wouldn't allow himself to cry. It was unfitting of a shinobi, but even so, the near tidal wave of emotions threatened to break that self-imposed rule. Before him lay the first person to ever treat him as a real human being, to actually show him the smallest amount of kindness. Nothing would ever take the position in his heart. Nothing ever could. He would always be Naruto's first precious person. The ceremony dragged on. It sounded horrible to put it like that, but it was how Naruto felt. It was like a never-ending torment to stand here and listen to people talk about the old man, even if it was special and memorable moments from his life. The only moments Naruto cared about were those fleeting talks they would share, the secret praising smirks Hiruzen would give him after a prank, and the one time the old man had let him wear the Hokage's robes. That one memory actually made Naruto smile, even if it was only briefly before the pouring rain redampened his spirit. The cloak had been ridiculously oversized, and Naruto was constantly tripping up. However, every time he did so, Hiruzen was right there to catch him. The most amusing part was wearing the hat. It dwarfed Naruto's head to the point of completely obscuring his vision. The Hokage had called it a vision of a future to come. Now Naruto could only look back at it as a past that might have been. Naruto had difficulty laying down the white flower that was clutched in his trembling fist. He reached out his hand, but the simple plant just wouldn't drop. He could only stare at the framed photo, willing this all to be one terrible nightmare, and he could wake up to see him one last time. He felt something clutch his hand, and warmth spread from that contact. He looked around to see Taiyo next to him, also looking at the portrait. He finally let the flower drop into the ground pile atop the coffin before letting the red-haired girl lead him away. There were only a few people in the line after him, dressed in the same black mourning clothes. He paid them no heed, too lost in his own thoughts to even notice as the service finally came to a close. The rain finally letting up as it did so. Nobody would notice the solitary tear that finally managed to crawl out of Naruto's eye. It just blended in with the countless droplets of rain that soaked through his form. Naruto sat on the bank of the lake, looking out over the peaceful, calm water like he had done for the past 3 days. Taiyo and Gaara had come to see him many times, neither attempting to move him or coerce him to do so in the slightest. They understood that he would start training again when he felt ready, when he had allowed enough time to pass to deal with the loss of a pseudo-father figure. Naruto didn't say much when they visited, but he was sure they understood that he appreciated their company. Taiyo was especially helpful. She would come and just sit next to him for a while, never saying anything, just sharing in the scene with him. Surprisingly, it was Gaara who was the first talkative one, telling Naruto of some of the kids who had begun following him around since the invasion. He had actually managed to get Naruto to laugh yesterday, the first real sign of his recovery. Like always, he smelled the newcomer before he heard them, even cleared their throat. Naruto said nothing, not particularly caring of what this Anbu was here for or what he had to say. When the black and grey-clad man saw that he wouldn't get a response from the Jinchuriki, he approached, somewhat cautiously. Naruto should have expected as much, considering the Anbu were some of the few privy to his status as the QB's container. I have been instructed by the temporary council consisting of Hamuro and Koharu to talk to you concerning your current allegiances. Naruto actually quirked an eyebrow at this, turning a little to see the wolf-masked Anbu properly. What about them? The Anbu remained impassive, despite the obvious venom in his words. They want to ask about the reason behind your headband. Again, this caused Naruto to raise his eyebrow in surprise and suspicion. The reason I don't carry the Sunagakure symbol? The Anbu nodded, equally equally disappointedly. None of their business. Naruto couldn't see it, but he was sure the man's eyes narrowed after that statement. They also asked me to inquire as to what your intentions are now. Naruto finally turned fully, standing up from his spot for the first time in 3 days, already feeling the associated stiffness ease off his muscles. My intentions? I intend to do exactly as the Suna Council asked me to do, to help our allies in the event of an emergency situation. Once again, Naruto felt the piercing suspicion emanate from the operative as he gave that same reason. I was informed by the council that if that were the case, you were to report to the Hokage Tower to be assigned into a temporary team with a shinobi from our village. Naruto nodded slowly. He could ask this man why that was, but he felt it would probably be better to get those answers from the source. And my teammates have been similarly informed. Naruto nodded again, all the confirmation the masked man needed before he shimmered away in a small shower of leaves. Not really the type for long conversations, those Anbu. Good thing I'm used to Gaara. What? Uncle's loud scream actually caused Homura to wince slightly before twisting a finger inside his ear to clear the ringing. I thought the situation would be quite clear, Miss Mitarashi. Is there something specific you do not understand? He managed to keep his voice quite level, despite the pounding headache that threatened to overcome him. He wasn't quite sure how he and Koharu had managed to get stuck with being substitute Hokage for the time being, but he was beginning to respect his old teammate just a little bit more if this was what he had to put up with on a daily basis. Yeah, tell me again when I'm getting stuck with a bunch of snot-nosed genin. Homura sighed for the 5th time since Uncle had entered the office. While the chair was certainly comfy, he wasn't sure it was worth it. Like I already said, Miss Mitarashi, Uncle eyed him dangerously. Stop calling me that! A sign number 6 managed to escape his lips. Like I already said, Uncle, the village needs all available resources acting at full strength. While we appreciate your abilities in covert operations right now, we need to focus more on those missions that actually get noticed. If other nations catch on to the fact we are in a weakened condition, they will no doubt take advantage of that. Uncle growled something under her breath, but that didn't sound all that pleasant. Yeah. But why me? There are tons of Jonin that don't have squads. Homura leaned back in the chair more, his fingers subconsciously reaching up to rub his temple. And each will be getting equally important missions, I assure you. Uncle didn't seem at all pleased with the answer, but before she could complain again, Homura cut her off. Uncle, there's really nothing you can do about this. When a new Hokage is instated, you can take it up with them. Until then, the village is under mine and Koharu's direction, and I assure you that she will back up what I have to say. Uncle's argument died on the tip of her tongue, and she leaned back with her arms under her ample chest. At least tell me who the little gakis are. Homura finally allowed a smile to trace his old features. Oh, I think you've met them before. Naruto walked out into the training ground, flanked by his 2 friends. They had all arrived at the Hokage's office to be told that they would meet their new Jonin instructor here. Naruto had wanted to ask who they would be getting, but after thinking about it, he realized he didn't actually know any other Jonin level shinobi in the village anyway. Discounting Kakashi and the proctors for the Chunin exams, Tayuya had already told him that Kakashi had students, including Duckbutt, who Naruto correctly guessed was Sasuke. Tayuya and Gaara seemed happy that Naruto was moving around and would soon go back to training, but there was no mistaking the fact that he was quieter now. Both could sympathize, having lost his strange parents figures themselves. Gaara, his father, and Tayuya, the old woman from her village. He tried to banish these thoughts from his head as he moved into the training area and out of the way, fenced-off forest near to where the Forest of Death was. They calmly waited for 15 minutes, none of them saying anything, even though it was soon fairly obvious that Tayuya was getting annoyed at their sensei's absence. Naruto was off to one side, flicking through the pages of his little orange book, while Gaara sat Indian style with a ring of sand slowly rotating around his body. Tayuya was the only one left without anything to do. She could have practiced her flute, but she needed the right mood to do that in. Irritated and frustrated was not. She also couldn't even read like Naruto because she had left her copy in their room by mistake. Normally in that situation she would just take Naruto's, but somehow he had managed to get onto the next book, so she would be completely confused by what was going on. When 15 minutes had turned into 30, Tayuya began to pace, and Naruto swore. He could see the steam begin to pour out of her ears and the periphery of his vision. He just hoped their sensei was good at getting out of genjutsu, or they were in an unpleasant couple of hours. This was also rather exciting for him, for as long as he had known his only real teacher were Baki and Kyubi, it would be an interesting experience if nothing else. Finally, they heard somebody approaching from the direction of the forest, and everyone except Naruto turned to face it, only for a very large snake to emerge from the trees and slither into the middle of them. Sup! All three teens looked at the snake curiously. It was about the length of a tree, as thick as Naruto's body. It was mottled green in color with two very deep stripes of black running the length of its body. It unsurprisingly managed to be quite intimidating. "You're our sensei." The snake just looked at her in what Naruto guessed was the snake equivalent of exasperation. "No, child, I'm here too." He hung his head as if the next thing he had to do was the most embarrassing thing in its life. "Introduce her." It looked around for a few moments, sending glancing looks back into the forest while its tongue perpetually flicked in and out. It gave a hiss that almost seemed like a sigh before it rose its head up in mock pride and called out at the top of its lung, "Introducing the one and the only Queen of Snakes, Mistress of Dango, Anko Mitarashi." The snake seemed to just lump over, a very, very irritated gleam in its eye, before poofing back to wherever it came from. In its wake, the training ground erupted into a miniature hurricane before the woman herself appeared in a tremendous whirl of leaves. Anko appeared with a victorious grin, holding her hands on her hips. Naruto could almost see the imaginary cape fluttering behind her. She opened her eyes, expecting to see odd faces and excited Genny looking at her in wonder. Instead, she got two boys who were completely ignoring her, one meditating and the other reading, whilst the redhead was just staring at her murderously. "You're half an hour late." Anko glared back with just as much conviction. "Hey, it's not like I'm Kakashi or something. A great introduction like that requires planning." She looked around, expecting at least a nod of agreement from Naruto. She thought he understood her prankster side. Instead, the blonde just tucked in the corner of the page he was reading, closed the book, and stood up expectantly. Anko's shoulders slumped a little, seeing that nobody appreciated her work yet again. "Well, whatever. I'm your new Jonin instructor. Here." She threw each of them the standard Chunin flak jackets, which they all deftly caught. "Congratulations, you're all officially Chunin rank. All of us." It was Tahiya who asked the question, rightly confused that she too had been promoted. Anko just looked at her disinterestedly, still miffed nobody had liked her entrance. "Yeah, I don't know, something about the way you fought during the invasion or something like that." Tahiya didn't complain for once. She was just happy that she wouldn't have to retake the exams in 6 months without her teammates to back her up. She wasn't saying she needed them, but it wouldn't be the same without them. "What about Hana?" Anko stared at Naruto with proper irritation, while he just smirked, rubbing his nose subtly. "Damn you, kid, why do you have to ruin our introductions? Okay, come on out, Hana, they know." They heard a small commotion from further into the forest, and what sounded suspiciously like somebody falling out of a tree. "What about the fireworks?" Anko just put a hand to her forehead, looking for all the world like she just wanted to kick something until it stopped moving. "Leave the fireworks! There's no point now!" They heard more commotion from the forest before Hana shunshined into the clearing next to Anko. "I told you they would find me." Anko turned to her with a very irritable expression in her eyes. "You could have told me the Gaki had some kind of super sense of smell." Hana shrugged sheepishly, while a dark cloud seemed to descend over Anko before she forcefully dispelled it. All this time, the three getting turned Chunin had watched on in part amusement and part annoyance. Naruto loudly cleared his throat, and both Jonin turned. This time both looked rather sheepish as they rubbed the back of their heads. "Right, well, I'm not your full-time instructor because I'm only Tokubetsu Jonin, as is Hana. That's why we'll take it in turns." After a round of surprisingly accepted nods from their new students, the two Kunoichi breathed a small sigh of relief. Anko turned to Naruto suddenly, a very curious look in her eye now. "Okay, pleasantries are over. We all know each other, blah blah blah. First order of business is why the hell you're under a genjutsu." Anko sighed happily that had been bugging her ever since the Forest of Death. Naruto, for one, seemed shocked, but not all that surprised. Tahiya had assured him that genjutsu would be tough, but she also figured that most Jonin wouldn't be able to sense it. He looked around at his teammates. Garo just shrugged, not particularly caring either way, while Tahiya had calmed down enough to do likewise. "Well, okay, I guess, but it's probably best if I showed you." Hana and Uncle nodded eagerly, now both very curious about what it was Naruto was hiding. Both with very different ideas as to what it could be. Naruto stood up from his position on the ground and clasped his hands together in a seal familiar to everyone. Kai! He didn't even shout it. It had become second nature to dispel or apply this personal illusion. He shimmered for a moment without the normal flash of smoke to signal the loss of the illusion. Seconds later, he stood, mostly unchanged, but with a few very differences. His claws, once again, were visible, extended from his fingers in a noticeable fashion as they gleamed in the sunlight. Likewise, his proper ears were also free and happily twitched atop his head like a diver coming back up from air. His whisker marks became deeper and more defined, more scar-like, but without any of the disfiguring features. His canines elongated in a similar fashion to his claws, poking out of his mouth even when closed. The final and most noticeable of claws of all the features was the addition of three bushy and very excited blonde tails that thrust behind him expectantly. Uncle and Hana just stood transfixed by the sight, taking in Naruto's new appearance with wide eyes. He briefly wondered if this had been a bad idea, already imagining being dragged off to some Ambu jail. That Naruto flinched involuntarily as both girls spoke in unison. He unconsciously backed away, preparing for his dangerous flight from the village. Awesome! He opened his eyes that he hadn't even realized he had closed in shock. That wasn't the reaction he had been expecting. When he did so, he found Uncle very much inside his personal space, closely examining his whisker marks with scrutiny. He also felt something lightly brush one of his tails and looked around to see Hana looking at them with the exact same amount of intent as her friend. Wow, no wonder you use a four-legged taijutsu style. This must provide great balance. Can you feel things with these whiskers? How do you stop people standing on them? How hard are the claws? Why three tails? Do you have them on your feet as well? I wonder what a hickey would feel like from somebody with fangs. Naruto just managed to stammer through the questions with various ums and ahs as they came fast from all directions. He felt like a piece of art in a collection being evaluated for auction. The last question managed to catch him off guard the most, but not more so that Anko suddenly grabbed one of his tails and rubbing it against her cheek. Soft. Naruto spun in surprise, yanking said tail out of her grasp, leaving her to pout like a child with its toy taken away. It was actually so adorable that he considered just giving her the tail back, but he shook his head of it, mumbling under his breath about girls managing to control his life. He spun around again to find Hana and Uncle looking at him expectantly before he realized he hadn't answered a single one of their questions. Yes, I can feel things with the whiskers. I tuck them into my pants to stop people standing on them. I haven't found anything that breaks my claws yet. And yes, they're on my feet as well. Uncle Hana seemed pleased by the answers before Hana frowned, realizing he had missed one, much to Naruto's displeasure. But why three of them? He sighed, his shoulders slumped at the same moment. He gave a pleading look towards his friends, who could only offer him shrugs and helpless looks that made him want to seriously break something. It shows how much of the Kyuubi's power I can safely use. He winced involuntarily, already expecting the hateful look and harsh comments like demon or monster instead. When he opened his eyes, he only saw the Tukunoichi even more interested than before. Before any more awkward and invasive questions that he really didn't want to answer came up, he quickly pointed in Gaara's direction. Hey, he's a Jinchuriki too. Interrogate him. The two Jonin looked at Gaara curiously. Uncle coming close enough that the sand in his gourd began to twitch dangerously. So why don't you look like that as well? Gaara merely narrowed his eye into a glare, something Uncle wouldn't have thought could look so frightening coming from a 14-year-old. Shukaku and I don't have a great dialogue. He left at that, making it very clear he wouldn't say any more on the topic. Uncle backed off. Gaara could pull off the psycho look if he wanted to, and she kept that in mind for future brief reference. She turned back around to Naruto, giving his true form one last look. Alright, Fuzzball, you might want to cover up again. Some of the villagers won't be quite as understanding as we are. Naruto nodded sadly. He already knew that, of course, and redid the genjutsu with Tayuya's help to strengthen it. Uncle coughed loudly when they were done, looking over the three of them again, taking them all in. Okay, now that little tangent has been taken care of, onto the second order of business. You're all moving in with me. All three Chunin looked at her skeptically, even Garo. Why? We already live with Hana. Uncle smiled at them devilishly, a look they knew all too well by now that spoke of trouble in the future. Let's just say I like to start training early, and the Inuzaka compound is a little far away for my tastes. Hana looked at her in irritation, but quickly softened the gaze as she recognized what Anko had planned. She sauntered over to Naruto, coming behind him and wrapping her arms around his shoulders, pouting cutely. Ah, is Naruto going to miss me? The boy in question instantly reddened, almost passing out from the insinuation behind the honey-laced words. It was at that point that Anko noticed Taiyo fuming off to one side, shooting looks at Hana that she knew too well. She filed that information away for future reference as her smile grew even more devious. She let Hana walk back over to her side, leaving a very embarrassed and confused Naruto in her wake. Before continuing, alright, next up, I've been told to say that you guys need to wear these. She held out 3 identical leaf forehead protectors, and the three Chunin just stared at them. No, the simple, level answer came from Gaara. He crossed his arms over his chest, but it wasn't a petulant maneuver. He simply did not want to wear it. My loyalty is and always will be to Tsunagakure. Uncle looked at him for a moment and found she couldn't really hold that against him. He was the son of a Kazekage after all. Next she turned to Taiyo, who likewise had placed her arms under her chest. No, Uncle waited for a few moments for the girl to continue. Any particular reason? Uncle had been curious as to the reason Takuya didn't wear any symbol on her headband. My loyalty isn't to any fucking village. Uncle narrowed her eyes. It sounded like how a mercenary would feel, or more dangerously, a missing nin. It's the shithead over there. Everybody in the clearing did a double take, looking at the proud redhead curiously. Naruto especially. Where he goes, I go. Simple fucking as that. Uncle just nodded, albeit after she managed to get the amused and inquisitive look off her face. Well then, Fuzzball, you seem to be the linchpin here. Let me guess, you're not going to take the forehead protector either? Naruto shook his head with a small smile, and Uncle sighed. It seemed that was a common occurrence around these three. Not for the reason you would think, though. He took off his forehead protector, allowing his shaggy bangs to fall forward in front of his eyes. He carefully removed the metal plate from the headband and flipped it over to show a faded but no less visible leaf symbol. Uncle was just full of questions around these kids. They were more interesting than most of the people she knew. Where did you get that? She was somewhat fearing the answer by this point. It wasn't an uncommon practice for people to claim the headbands of shinobi they defeated or killed. When I left the village, I sneaked into the academy and took one. I never figured I would be back to explain that, though. Uncle just smiled. She wasn't there when Naruto had left. She was in sea country. It made her involuntarily shiver and reach back up to the spot on her neck. Naruto noticed the action and remembered something Kakashi had told them more than a few months ago. Oh, Kakashi told us to ask you about Orochimaru's curse marks. Uncle's head shot around so fast Naruto feared she may have kept going, her eyes boring a hole through his skull. Why would you want to know about them? She didn't realize her hand was still firmly clasped on her neck, a spot you knew too well because she rubbed it too. Hana was worried for her friend. People had gotten injured when Uncle talked about her old sensei, or his last gift to her. You have one too, don't you? It was Taiyo asking the question, and Uncle turned to look at her, almost hesitantly this time. Naruto was surprised at how soft and fragile her voice sounded, and without a single swear. Two? Taiyo nodded, and drawing back her shirt just enough that Uncle could see the mark. The older woman quickly did the same, revealing an identical tomo pattern. She looked sadly down at Taiyo, who merely stared back defiantly. I don't need your pity. I'm getting this shit off of my neck. Off to the side, Naruto nodded enthusiastically, and the sight made Uncle smile. Yeah, well, when you do that, let me know, will you? She straightened up, hiding the mark once again with her trench coat and settling her face back into its normal chilling smile. Well, no point talking about the pedo and his weird ink fetish anymore. It made Taiyo chuckle a little. Come on, might as well get packed and moved into my place. They spent the next few hours moving what few possessions they had brought with them from the Inuzaka compound to Uncle's apartment. It was actually pretty large, more so than Naruto would have expected for somebody living on their own, but it turned out Uncle received the same stipend check that he had when he was still living here. She wouldn't tell them why, but it was obviously a sore topic, so everyone dropped it. Anko had given Tahiya the most amused expression imaginable when she had plainly started bringing her things into the room Naruto had chosen. He had actually been a little surprised at first, imagining that they would have the same relationship as when they were in Suna. However, it seemed to be more of a fuck you to Anko more than anything else. If the look she had given in return was anything to go on, it clearly said, "And what?" By the time they were all settled in, it was dark. Naruto had already tried to have some of the dango in the pantry, only to get chased around the entire apartment by Anko. It wasn't even a playful chase. Her hands held the kunai and her eyes spoke of terrible tortures. After that, everybody learned that around Anko, dango was off limits, much to Taya's grief. Naruto found it once again strange how much animosity there was between the two women. He would have thought that with so much in common, they would have easily become friends. They stayed up for a while, mostly talking. Uncle was supposed to do some stupid team building exercises where she asked each of them their likes, dislikes, hopes and dreams, etc. However, she got the general idea from what they said, and it didn't really seem all that necessary considering the three knew each other since they were kids. Finally, Uncle asked the question that had been itching at the back of her head for a while now. "So, how long have you two been together then?" She was definitely looking right at Naruto and Takuya when she said it. However, the insinuation was completely lost on the blonde. "What? Me and Takuya? I found her when I was 7, a few weeks after I left the village." Uncle smiled like the Cheshire Cat, moving her head in closer while lowering her voice to a husky whisper. "No, I mean," she rolled her eyes and motioned with her head between them. "Together." Once again, Naruto looked confused, puzzling out what the woman was talking about, whereas Takuya immediately turned red. "We fucking aren't together!" Uncle raised an eyebrow bemusingly. "But you sleep together." Naruto still looked confused as ever while Takuya only grew angrier. "We sleep in the same bed. You have no idea how warm shithead over there is." Uncle's other eyebrow followed the other. "Oh really? Maybe I'll try him out sometime." Naruto didn't quite like the way Uncle looked at him when she said that and was still confused about what the hell was going on. Eventually, the conversation wound down and turned to more mundane things like previous training and the like. Gaara turned in first, complaining that there had been too much excitement in one day after Naruto being inactive for so long. Uncle had already gone to bed, warning that anybody who entered her room without her permission, for some reason looking at Naruto as she said it, would meet a swift and bloody end. Naruto and Takuya likewise retired. Both were just as tired as Gaara, even though neither was the type to ever admit things like that. Naruto would always want to be known as the one with boundless stamina, while Takuya just didn't like admitting weakness. They settled into the large and surprisingly comfortable bed, Takuya immediately curling into Naruto's body. They didn't notice the door creak open and somebody silently shuffled in. A few flashes of light later, and Uncle walked out, clutching the camera with a cheeky grin. "Too perfect, just too perfect. Not together, my perfectly toned ass." End of chapter 22.